This is Clarence. He is 1 year old today. These are his friends. Like all babies, they were born with 100 billion neurons, nearly twice as many as an adult, even though their brains are half the size. Their brains are growing faster than any other part of their bodies. 60% of their metabolism is being spent on growing their brains. By 3, their brain volume will have doubled. But those 100 billion neurons will not stay forever. As the children move, play, and learn, these neurons are being connected into circuits. Circuits that govern emotions, motor skills, and speech. The circuits that are used get reinforced. The circuits that are neglected get pruned away. What remains is a basic structure that will influence the rest of their life. It is how they will see the world. It will influence their thinking, feelings, their joys and fears. Most of how the world will seem, how they will fit, what they will do, will come from this brain. So if you want to change the world for the future, build the brain. Focus on these first 3 years. And in the first 3 years, parents make the difference.
Welcome to day 2 of an amazing conference, celebrating the release of American Tragedy and talking about the complexity of the issues. I am Lisa Sabey, the producer, and Josh Sabey and Sarah Sabey are by my side doing the technology, and we're so grateful for everyone here and that we are able to go forward. We're having some Facebook issues. So if you want to let anybody know, they can go to americantragedymovie.com and they can stream it from there. We're not sure what's going on with the Facebook, but we are trying to figure it out. But let me introduce 2 wonderful people. I met Liza Long doing American Tragedy. Josh, my son and the director, called her up after having seen some articles she had written and called me up afterwards and said, I just talked to an amazing woman, and told me about Liza and said, I think we should interview her. And so we went and interviewed her and her son, Eric, and we're so impressed with the connection between Liza and her son. Now, Liza is very credentialed. She has her doctorate. Her dissertation was on mental health advocacy and leadership. And she teaches at the university, and she's written an award-winning book, The Price of Silence, A Mother's Perspective on Mental Illness. But I think her greatest credential and what has caused her the greatest struggle and battle and heartache and joy eventually was with a son who had bipolar and was very complicated to raise. and she never gave up. It was seldom easy, if ever. And it happened from a very, very young age. And I just honor Liza to be where she is, talking as she is, having never given up on a son. That was very, very hard. Jeff is in a similar and a dissimilar situation. Jeff adopted 4 children, 2 of them from Eastern Europe. And one of them has issues from pre-verbal times before they got him that has caused Jeff and his wife a lot of questioning and searching for help and seeking to understand what they can do. And it has exhausted them. It has been hard on each one of them. It's been hard on their marriage. It's been hard. It's been hard. And they have a different perspective. And he is also well credentialed. He not only he used to be the director of education at the American Arbitration Association in Los Angeles. And then he felt a real desire to teach in the high schools. And now he's at Arapahoe High School. And if you remember, there was a shooting at Arapahoe High School, and he was there. And he experienced not just the shooting, but the reaction of the students and the community. So he not only has the perspective of a teacher during a school shooting, but also a parent with a son who has been complicated. And again, Jose, I'm thrilled that Dr. Silva is with us also, and he will work with me in this interview. Liza, could you respond to what is your greatest takeaway from the movie American Tragedy?
Oh my goodness. It was such a beautiful film, but the thing that struck me the most as a mother was a mother's love. The way that Sue Klebold's love for her son just shone through every hard part of that movie. And I felt so connected to that love because it was such a tremendous tragedy and so hard, I think, for her to process as a mother. And yet, ultimately, she lost her son, her baby. And I was especially moved even by the opening scene where she holds her baby in her arms. And I remember thinking, none of us holds our brand new newborn in our arms and thinks, I think that you'll grow up someday and maybe have mental illness and maybe hurt yourself or hurt others. None of us thinks that. That's not the hope that we have for our children. So that just resonated with me so strongly. And then just her vulnerability and her brave willingness to communicate some very difficult thoughts. It really struck me as a mom, as a parent of a child who has a mental illness. She's lived a lot of our worst nightmares, and yet here she is trying to make a difference on the other side of that. So that's what really struck me.
That really, I think as moms, that struck both of us. And I'd have to add Lori Freeman and Lisa Neeson, who lost their sons to suicide.
Oh, yeah.
That the mother's love was deeply seen, I think, in their telling us their stories. And people have asked me, why are there not dads? And I would love to have a movie with dads, and someday we will make that. And this one happened just to be Sue's story and her friends that she knew, and it ended up being the moms. So I do know this is hard on dads too. But this was a story of the moms, from the mom's perspective. Jeff, I want to ask you the same question. From your perspective and your experience, what was your biggest takeaway from American Tragedy?
Yeah, I would agree with everything Lisa said too, and just add the piece of on the mom about not being able, to see something, to not see something, and then not be able to understand something. That piece meant home for me. And I think the other thing I just wanted to say on this is just the complexity of the bigger issue that you bring up, right? This is the purpose, to have a big, in-depth discussion. In order to do that, you have to have an awareness of the complexity of the issues, right? And so often we have these, simple solutions, and they sound really nice. I come from the adoption community, and there's a lot of similar challenges, but we come into these things saying, hey, love can conquer any child, right? If we just love them enough, all these things will go away. Or we tell ourselves after a tragedy that's somebody else's kid, or we'll say, well, it's the parents' fault, right? It was they did something wrong. Or the police can keep everybody safe. I mean, there's just a lot of simplistic solutions that we throw around, and I think what the movie tried to do is kind of move away from that and go into a lot more depth. I mean, really, this is a complex thing, and I understand where this happens. I mean, our brain has to simplify things. We have to make sense. We have to organize all the things that happen around us. But the danger of that is that we oversimplify, and we will not really get to a good solution if we do that. And I think this opens the door.
I think that is spot on for me too, is doing this documentary, I think for me was an eye opener. I kind of thought, let's just empower parents so that they can, parent for mental wellness. And then I met wonderful parents, and I've talked with wonderful friends on walks about, does it really make that? I mean, parents make a huge difference, and we want to empower parents, but it is a bigger picture. It is a huge puzzle, and we cannot simplistically limit it to guns or parents or schools or legislation, or it's got to be holding hands together and going forward with the purpose of making mental wellness universally accepted and taught in every venue possible. So thank you for that. Liza, I'm going to come back to you, and I want you just to be free to tell the public whatever you feel is important. What should we know from what you have learned in your life and your research and your writing?
Wow, that's such a big question. And I literally wrote a book on that. But what stuck out to me first and foremost is that as a parent, you are your child's most powerful advocate. And it can be so scary. I was terrified. Eric is my second child. My first child was plenty hard and plenty fun. And he's actually headed your way, Lisa, to Colorado to do a PhD in astrophysics. So
Awesome.
I got to be that mom over here. Woohoo! And then, my second child was very different. And from an early age, I would observe behaviors that were really troubling. Like, we always talk about tantrums, right? But Eric's tantrums would be 4 or 5 hours long, and he would wake up in the middle of the night just screaming. He had night terrors. I loved this child. He's such a sweet, funny boy. He even was as a child, as a baby, but he just struggled so hard, and he was in so much pain. And I remember, I think he was just 3 or 4 when he said, "Mom, I just want to be a 0. I don't want to be anymore because I hurt." And he said his head hurt. And I thought, well, aspirin, what? So he's a very articulate child, but none of us could really solve this puzzle. And he was working just as hard as anyone else. He wanted to be good. He wanted to be successful and have friends. But it was just a real struggle. And everywhere we went, this is why I say you have to be your child's strongest advocate. Everywhere we went, we ran into barriers, right? So, I went to the pediatrician, like when he was little and he was having these troubles, and she said, he's just a boy, he'll grow out of it, right? And then like later when he wasn't growing out of it, we're in kindergarten, we're at school, we have a clear the room order for Hurricane Eric, right? Because he can be unpredictably explosive and violent. And so at that point, for most parents, once you interact with the school system, that's when you start to get attention, right? So they have to keep the other kids safe. They've got to come up with plans. And that's where our journey really started. And we went through the alphabet soup of diagnoses for Eric. And I know that's so familiar to so many parents. So a lot of people start with ADHD. We started with an autism spectrum diagnosis for him, but then it moved through ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, which was, I didn't even know what these things were. They were throwing medications at this little boy that I didn't understand. I would research them and say, wow, this hasn't been tested on kids. I'm not saying medications are bad either. It's such a baffling and complex world, and parents have to become experts in so many fields. You have to become an expert in education and IEPs. You have to become an expert with your health insurance company and plan on spending hours per week fighting for care. You've got to be an expert in how to advocate for yourself in your job. I often say I'm one of the few few moms I know who was able to actually keep my job, and it's because I had an amazingly accommodating employer. My supervisor had done her master's degree in autism and special ed, and she got it. She, when I told her I needed an extremely flexible schedule, she was like, "Okay, you get the work done when you can, where you can." That's not the reality for most parents. So you have to become an expert in so many fields, and then unfortunately, many parents, including me, have to become experts in criminal justice because by the time Eric was 13 years old, he had already been sent to juvenile detention 4 times. The first time just a couple of weeks after his 11th birthday, and he had just been in the hospital, in the psychiatric hospital before that, before he was jailed. And the reason we sent him to jail is because his case manager told us that we would not be able to access services unless we sent our child to the juvenile justice system. And when I wrote my blog, I mentioned that, and no one wanted to believe me. I remember one journalist telling me, "That's not true. That can't possibly be true." I said, "Oh, it's true. I'm telling you, I've got paperwork that shows that it's true." And so, and I know now that I thought that was maybe just a quirk in Idaho. I know now that that's common across the United States. This school to prison pipeline is real. Here I am, a highly educated, highly privileged white woman, and I was having terrible time accessing services and help for my son. I can't even imagine what it's like for my friends who are people of color or in a less privileged situation than I am. But as I researched it, I started to learn what it's like. And it really is a school to prison pipeline for so many of our kids. We are literally robbing our nation of kids like Eric who can be treated, who can become stable. Now Eric is in his second year of college. He's studying social work and he plans to go on and do a joint MSW and law degree. So, that's what we're robbing ourselves of when we don't get these kids the help they need. That's why I'm so passionate about it. He's a great kid.
Well, I love that you're passionate, and we're not just robbing them of a future, we're robbing them of a present too.
Yes.
Being present in today with connections that last and with not just negative emotions.
Oh yeah.
And I love your compassion for Eric, understanding that my head hurts, that he was in pain.
Yeah.
And it makes it so complicated for him and for you and for the family. And I honor you and respect you. And I think Eric is great. It was fun to meet him.
He's a fun kid. Yeah.
He
And
is.
he's got 3 siblings. So that's a whole other, right? Just like you, Jeff. You've got 4 of them.
Yeah. You both are parents of 4. Jeff, what do you want the public to know that you have learned through your experience?
Yeah, that is a long, big, wide question. But even as I talk about one of my kids or students or whatever, when I talk about my son, I want to echo the same thing, is that I love my kid. I love him more than anything. So we separate the behavior from the person. But that behavior, it's crazy, right? I mean, when you're talking, I've read a little bit of what Lisa's wrote. And by the way, Lisa, when you wrote that article, my wife called me in tears and said, "Hey, you got to read this. You got to read this right away." She gets it. What do we want to know? I guess the main thing is it's nice to be understood. And to be honest, if I'm off to myself, I sometimes get mad. Like, how come these people don't get it? Why should they get it, right? They haven't had to see the world through this lens. But on the flip side, I mean, I've learned so much, right? I mean, going through, if I had just plug and play kids, just plugging in and they play with everybody and all works out great, that would be a different story, but I wouldn't grow. I mean, I've had to question every single moment of my existence and their existence. And I've learned so much, because really a lot of what is impacting them impacts all of us, but just at a different level. Their ability to, emotionally, to regulate themselves emotionally are all things that we have, but they have a reduced capacity to do this. And so it looks very, very different, but it teaches us about ourselves. So that's been just a learning experience in and of itself. But I guess one other thing I would say is, in going through this, it's Lisa talked about the advocacy part of it. And that would be an important piece for me too that I've experienced. But it was a complex thing for me, especially as a teacher, especially growing up, having kids through Columbine, having been in Iraq, all those things. What Lisa talked about, they're going through my mind. On the one hand, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed by my kid's behavior, and I want to explain it. I want people to understand it. Hey, we didn't do this, or he didn't mean to do that. And you start doing all these things, and so a lot's going on in your head that you wish people could understand, and it's almost impossible to do that. For my situation, we have 2 kids from orphanages, 2 from the foster situation. But that intro, Lisa, that you did at the beginning of this was amazing, talking about the neural development and the pruning. And so I think about, what happens in that first year, first 9 months. I mean, it is critical. And if you're in an orphanage, it is a whole different thing. And so what happens is these kids their brain is different. Their brain changes, right? And so when everybody's like, why don't you just do this? Or why don't you just do this? And you get all this unsolicited advice. And I just want to explain, but at a certain point, I also have to let my son be himself, and he has to learn and deal with consequences. So it's a very complex process that I've been going through. One other comment I'd make to Lisa's mentioned about the police. Actually, in our case, it actually turned out to be a pretty good situation where he had to do a stint with diversion. And I'm going to tell you, I was so fearful of that. I thought that was the worst. I mean, it was I was so scared. It ended up being the very best thing, in part because they gave him services, but probably more so, they gave us services. They taught us what pre-verbal trauma looks like, And so, to Lisa's article, when you're scared, you've got fear everywhere. Is my kid going to do something? You see their rages, and you think, are they going to do something? Are they going to do something that we're talking about very tragic? And we learned lots of things about that, but it helped getting us services. We've got to figure out what to do, how to respond. In many cases, when you're stuck with a rage, I mean, how do you respond? You become rageful, and you have to do the exact opposite, right? You have to be their frontal lobe for them. They don't have one. They're a lizard brain. And the skills to do that actually, in our case, came through the services. And I appreciate that.
That's awesome. Again, it goes back to, we have got to join hands, all the organizations and the families, and say, how can we help each other and not judge each other? What a wonderful world we would be in if we truly could say, I need help and I want to help. That's beautiful. Thank you both. Dr. Silva, do you want to begin with the questions?
Yes, thank you so much. And just to remind everyone that is listening right now, you can text in your questions to 307-655-6396. We'd love to hear your questions. I've been stuck in kind of just the statement you made, Jeff, around awareness of the complexities, right? And so when you think about that, using that, what would you tell yourself or wish you would have known as a young parent, knowing that there was going to be this level of complexities that you had no idea? What do you wish you would have known to prepare you for that? Oh, and this would be for both of you. But Jeff, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, it's funny, on social media, we see all these generational disputes going on and all that. And I kind of understand that now a little bit more, now that I have 4 teenagers, essentially. But I think back when you first become a parent and you think about what you did, right? You think about what happened when you were a kid and how your parents parented you, and you had these certain expectations, and it's going to look like this. And I just had that expectation. Again, if you love them enough, if you apply correct discipline and consistent discipline, these are going to be the results. And I had no context to contemplate the ignorance of that perception, right? It's just not true. It's just not true. It's more complex because it might be true for your kid, and like I said, what I call the plug and play kids, but it wasn't. In fact, so I mean, we had situations, right? You know, we had you learn a cuss word, you get a bar of soap, and this would have been a complete okay, it was a complete disaster, right? There would be no stopping it. It would just build and build and build. And I had to do the exact opposite of what made sense, what had been my experience, what everything that I had learned. I had to do things the opposite. And I wish I had that knowledge that, you know, each person is their own little being. And in this case, it could look exactly opposite of your expectations. And I wish I would have figured that out sooner.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Long, I am interested in your answer to this as well. So what given all those complexities and what you know now, would you wish you had known those first 9 months of parenting?
I'd have to think about how to say this really carefully because I am glad I did not know, Dr. Silva. I'm glad I did not know because it would be very difficult to choose, as Jeff chose, to take on these challenges. And I'm still so grateful. I'm grateful that this was the situation that I had because, kind of like Jeff was saying earlier, I feel like going through this experience has made me a much more empathetic person, just in general. It's made me a better teacher. It's made me a better friend. It's just made me a lot more aware of really de-escalation, the challenges. You know, when somebody cuts me off in traffic, I instantly create a positive story for that person. You know, and like I wasn't that person before I had Eric. I wasn't. I would have been mad. I would have had my road rage. I don't have any of that anymore. And a lot of that is because I've had to learn to be so patient and so still. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity. So I don't know that I would go back and tell my younger self anything. One thing that I wish new parents knew about, though, that I know now, and that I wish I'd known when Eric was young, is about the Nami Basics class. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, I'm a trained basics instructor, and I wish I had had that class for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it just gives you that information, right? It depersonalizes it. It says, of course you love your kid. Of course you're a good parent. Now let's get into the science, you know, and then let's get into some stuff that's going to help you to help your child. Not this blame. And, you know, I was laughing, Jeff, like I wish that we had gotten the type of training you got. So they stuck me in a love and logic class and gave me some sticker charts.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I learned some great skills like to parent my neurotypical kids. Love and Logic is a great program, honestly, for neurotypical kids, but it does nothing for a bipolar rage. So I had no coping skills for that. You know, I was glad everyone should do parenting classes. But yeah, that Nami Basics class, I just wish that I'd known about that for the information, but secondarily for the support. And that has been the most amazing thing about sharing my story. I'm not going to lie. I seriously thought I was the only mom in America. I think I said that in the movie. No other parent possibly could be thinking what I'm thinking right now. And like I instantly connected to these amazing advocates. In fact, we just had a reunion on Monday night. It was the anniversary of the Helping Families in Mental Health Crisis Act that a lot of us moms came together and worked on. And these are some of my best friends, some of the people I respect and trust the most. And that support group, wow, you know, everybody needs those support groups. And so that's why I recommend things like Nami Basics. And I wish pediatricians knew about it so that when parents like me came in and said, hey, I'm kind of concerned about my child, they could say, well, here's some resources that we have for you. You know, not he's just a boy, he'll grow out of it, but here's something that might help.
As you both were speaking and saying that I'm the CEO of the Colorado Association for Infant Mental Health, and it begins in those first few months. And we have to provide the resources to parents, to adoptive parents, and provide those resources. I think that we have failed as a society to be able to do that. And we systematically have created this barrier around getting the support you need for mental illness. And so we are talking about mental wellness, right? And so you both are advocates and fighters. I call them grassroots soldiers, right? We are grassroots soldiers that no one gave you how you were going to get through this. And so in this journey of becoming an advocate for mental wellness, what do you think are some of the skills that have been most impactful and important for you as a parent, both of you, to navigate this experience of parenthood, right? That it's not been easy. And so we'll start with you, Dr. Long.
Oh, I get to start. The word that popped into my head was resilience, and I wouldn't have thought of myself as a particularly resilient person, but it's interesting that you asked that question, because I found in my own personal reading, I was really gravitating a lot towards positive psychology, books like Grit, books like Mindset, and I found that for me, those were very helpful. But candidly, it was a really rough road for me, Dr. Silva, and I tell parents this, I've been in therapy most of the time that I've been parenting this child who has mental illness. It's been critical to my own mental wellness to be able to stay in therapy. And I have a history of chronic depression myself. And so, honestly, part of that resonated with me from the film, that people can look super happy on the outside and they can really be struggling on the inside. I've been that person. And so really focusing on resilience, because you're going to get told no a lot. You're going to get told no, or that's not possible, or we can't do that. And I found that by volunteering, by stepping up, I continue to write our state's report on mental health every year to the governor. I do those little things to say, hey, I'll help you. Now you help me. You help my friends. You help these other kids. So, partnering, I think, is really the word we would want to move toward. It can feel so adversarial sometimes, but we have to learn how to partner with the stakeholders. It's just what we have to do.
Love it. Thank you so much. And Jeff, partnership, I kind of see that with you. You lost your hair like me. So, but I feel like you haven't been alone in this journey. So what about you? What resonates with you still in the skill sets that you think have allowed you to just navigate as well?
Well, I think it helps, to have, you got to be in it with somebody. You got to have somebody to pick you up when you're down, and vice versa. Luckily, I've got an amazing wife that's also in the field, and this is her passion. She works at the adoption clinic at Children's, and this is kind of our world. So even if nobody else understands the world, we can pick each other up. So if we're pushing against a wall, the other person has different skill sets and looks around it at a different thing. I'm in the school setting, and at some points I've had to push hard, and our district was actually great with us, but it just, you need somebody. I've got a grandma in our corner. There's a special ed teacher. We just have a lot of people in our corners that when we get too tired, they have a different idea, or they have a different way. Mm-hmm. And inevitably, 2 or 3 of us might be down at a certain time, but it just takes the other person to kind of pick us up. And without that, I think we would have been in some trouble.
I want to just say how important it is to be aware that you can't just treat the child without treating yourself. You must, I mean, for mental wellness, for the family, as the parents, or they must have somebody to talk with. And I love Nami also. I think it's just an amazing organization. Really started grassroots organization that's really very influential and big now. And these experiences with complicated children are really hard on marriages, and really hard on self-esteem, and really hard on a sense of, hope for the future sometimes. And I think you need somebody who can just love you for who you are and acknowledge that it is hard. It is hard to be a parent with a child with a complicated brain. So I really appreciate both of you talking about that.
Thank you both so very much. I want to echo that as well. I think, I'm a step parent, and we've had challenges, and so navigating those. And thank you both so much for just continuing to share your story. I did my dissertation in restorative practices in ending the school to prison pipeline, trying to look at what was the effects, social emotional learning, classroom emotional climate. And then they brought those variances into the classroom, and if the educator didn't understand it, created deficit thinking, right? Which then leads to the school to prison pipeline. So my question is how do you think you could change, through your experiences, the juvenile justice system to make it better, to make it approachable, more interactive? What were things that you see within that system that our viewers or those listening might be able to say, that's an area I can stand up in, or, oh, I felt that too. I'd love to hear you both. Jeff.
Yeah, sure. By the way, just to support what you're saying, my wife threw a statistic in front of me. 85% of all inmates, 85% spend some time in foster care or adoption.
Correct. Are in the system. That is correct. Yeah.
That blows my mind. I mean, it absolutely blows my mind. And one of the things I would say in terms of the juvenile justice system, like I said, our experience was amazing. There was a moment when I was scared of the stigma, the labeling effect, all these things that were going to happen. And the caseworker looked at me and he goes, "You know, I'm here to help your kid. I'm not here to, get him in trouble. That's the whole purpose of the diversion program." And I knew that, but I didn't know that, And so it was, I guess from that moment, it was kind of like, hey, there are services available and there are people that get it. And it's good that those people aren't your friends. Actually, it's really great. And they helped us kind of understand what we're dealing about with pre-verbal trauma, adoption, brain changes, reactive attachment disorder, fetal alcohol, all these things. It's a whole different thing. So the educational component of the judicial system for kids is out there, and I didn't know about it. And I think they're doing some good work, but what can be changed is, again, that upstream work that the movie was getting to, right? That ability to affect them young, because he was young at the time, and able to prevent some bigger problems. And I teach psychology too. I've done some things in my classroom that I think can help promote this concept of, what happens. Why when they get to high school do the wheels fall off? There's some things that you can understand. Brain science has gone crazy in the last 15 years. I've been doing this over 20 years, and there's a lot of good research out there. And in doing so, you get it. Without that research, you don't have that aha moment to understand it, and that impacts your ability to trust people and to do the work they're telling you to do.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability, Jeff. I think for fathers and anyone listening out there, right, they can feel the emotion, the angst, but the love, I think, just in your words and in the encouragement that you're able to show to us. So thank you so much for that, and just giving us yourself. Dr. Long, I think your son, right, is a prime example of a student that I worked with students on the spectrum, and these kids weren't going, and I'm like, no, they are good students. We have to find what works for them. And they're all excelling right now, right? And so, but if not, they would have been on that path. As a mother, I can only imagine the heartache for you to endure this process. Share your story regarding that.
Well, you had originally asked about juvenile justice, and I actually was wishing that Eric were in the room. He's in his second appointment now on by the governor on our state's Juvenile Justice Commission.
Yes.
Where I just love that he's actually influencing the state of that. However, Eric and I both are super angry that I'm saying this in a nice way, that we even have a conversation about mental health that involves jail. For me, it's just kind of baffling. Again, my own son was in this school to prison pipeline you mentioned. And by the way, Dr. Silva, I think I cited you in my dissertation. Woohoo. So now I'm fangirling a little bit. But yeah, I was experiencing that with my own son, the school to prison pipeline thing. It was infuriating. And then I realized it was happening to so many other kids. And, I think the most often cited study is still Teplin et al., the largest study, maybe 2002, that 75% of kids in the juvenile justice system have at least one mental illness. And a lot of them are diagnosed for the first time when they interact with the system, which, right there, do we have opportunities? If many of these kids are not even diagnosed until they get to juvenile justice, we have lots of opportunities. I do see the schools, by the way, as a powerful place to intervene with people like Jeff, people like the principal in Washington. I don't know if you remember that, the principal at the high school in Washington in Paper Tigers, the documentary, who turned those kids' lives around. Like when kids were bad and they came to his office, instead of saying, well, you've got detention, he said, tell me what's going on with you. You know, just ask the question, tell me what's going on with you. And a lot of times, you know, if we can just kind of reframe that whole thing, I personally believe, and I've seen, that most kids really want to behave in the classroom, and they can sometimes really struggle with self-regulating strategies. So again, anyone who's watching, I'd say, you know, Stuart Shanker's work on self-regulation, that's a great book to read. But what I saw when I went down to San Antonio, I got to see at 1 in 5 Minds, a sensory regulation room. And I think this should be standard in every school. Every school in America should have 2 things, a sensory regulation room and a dedicated school psychologist who can help out. Like, you know, the way things are right now, they're so overtaxed, but this sensory regulation room would really benefited my son, because a lot of times, you know, if we can catch him before he explodes and he wants to catch himself, and he had some teachers who had some great strategies, by the way, for that. But if he had a place where he could go and calm down and he had someone he could talk to, that would have really, really taken the pressure off of him, and not just him, but so many kids. You know, we're asking a lot of these kids who are on the spectrum or who have ADHD, telling them to sit in a desk, and you know, I mean, it's just a lot to ask. So I think our schools are powerful places for change, and we just have to think creatively.
I think so too. I love in Baltimore, and I'm sure in other places, but in Baltimore, they no longer have punishment. If a child is struggling in the elementary school grades, in some of the schools, if the child is struggling, they bring them to a room where there's a person who works with them on what skills can you use right now.
Right.
Why did you do this, and why did you misbehave? But okay, this misbehavior is showing that there's a deficit of skills to deal. So instead of punishing you for what you don't have skills for, let's build up the skill set so you can start to interact with school in a better way. It makes so much sense. And the punishment makes 0 sense in school and in the juvenile system. Liza, I wanted to ask you, in the movie, you said there are unlearned lessons of Columbine. What did you mean by that?
Oh, wow. One unlearned lesson, and I think when we talked, it was right after Parkland. And I think that was the context of why I was thinking about that, because Parkland was so preventable, right? And to me, that was one of those situations where literally everyone knew that this kid was struggling, that this kid needed help. He was screaming for help. Yes. And he was interacting with the system, and everyone was, you know, checking their little boxes. So, you know, in Sue's case, she didn't really have many warning signs with Dylan. But in the case of the Parkland shooter, there were so many. And so one of the unlearned lessons, I think, is that we just have continued to allow this to happen, right? And if we could somehow divert these kids, right? Maybe Adam Lanza would be alive. Maybe Sue's son would be alive. Maybe they would be contributing to society, you know? It just breaks my heart, because we want to blame parents. That's easy, but this is a societal failure, right? We have failed as a society. We have failed to care for our most vulnerable. And especially, I know you talk a lot about children and mindfulness, and we've talked a lot about that. But you know, when we look at the adult population, 10 million people in America living with severe mental illness, 1/3 of our chronic homeless population, very disproportionately represented in our jails and prison systems. You know, 4% of all Americans, but 21% of people on death row live with schizophrenia or bipolar. You know, to me, this is just a massive breakdown on a societal level, where we could intervene, we could help people to lead happy, healthy, productive lives, and we failed. We failed parents, we failed families, we failed our communities.
Jeff, I agree that we have a systematic failure, but I also know there's a lot of people trying to do a lot of changes. And I'm curious, after Arapahoe High School shooting, what was the best thing that you saw come out of that?
Well, you know, a lot of things. I think the main thing is that we learned to coordinate what people saw, right? The thing is, in secondary school, you have different eyes on different kids. They have all these different classes. And I think the biggest lesson that came out of that was, how do we coordinate that? When one person says that, how do we share that, take another look, investigate a different thing? Because you could see 6 different things that happen, but unless that information is shared, then you're not going to know. And of course, there's privacy concerns, right? I mean, we've been talking about stigma and labeling effects, so you have to be concerned. So finding the balance, and the balance definitely shifted to public safety and to sharing information in the right way. So I think that was the biggest thing. There were lots of other security things that happened, and plans and procedures, but the biggest thing was the coordination and the ability to use the information that we have more efficiently and get on the same page.
Dr. Long, I have a question for you. And this is from a viewer, and I know that this has been asked of me, and it's tough to answer, but do you think medications generally help with mental disabilities, and are we over-medicating our society?
Those are 2 different questions.
You caught me. You caught me.
I will answer the first question first. Do I think medications help with mental illness? In my son's case, speaking from my son's case, when we finally, at the age of 13, got the diagnosis of bipolar disorder and he started taking lithium, all of the rages stopped. We had no more violent behavior. And I mean, none, no more violent behavior ever since his last hospitalization when he was 13 years old. Now, that doesn't mean it's been a cakewalk. You know, this hasn't been an easy life for him, but he doesn't have the violent behavior. And once you take that behavior, that violent piece out, so many other things are possible, right? So lithium leveled out what we think was probably a manic rage. You know, he always laughs. He's like, I didn't get the fun mania. I got the irritable, what do they call it? Extremely irritable mania. I was like, yeah. And, you know, that's why for me, I like bipolar. I was like, really? Well, he's not like what I would think of. And I learned a lot about that. So yes, when medication can be incredibly effective. I myself take a daily antidepressant. I have sometimes weaned off of those. I've gone back on them. I wouldn't even think of going off my antidepressant right now. Sorry, like the world's interesting and I got to be strong for my students. But
correct.
Yeah, so I don't feel like there's any shame. I remember a student once asked me, she said, well, I just wish I could manage my bipolar disorder on my own without my meds. And, you know, I take thyroid medication and I was like, I've never thought to myself, I wish I could manage my thyroid condition on my own without my meds. I just take my meds. But the question's complicated. And I really love Dr. Alan Francis. If any of you don't follow him on Twitter yet, follow him. He's great. And I loved his book, Saving Normal, because are we over medicating? Probably, maybe, yeah. You know, do we need medication for every little thing? Probably not. Should it be the first line like it is in so many cases? Probably not. So medication, life-saving, wonderful, game-changing, but also should be used appropriately. And I think that's where, you know, our current system, we sometimes rush to medication. When are we really sure that it's ADHD? Are we sure? You know, let's give it a little time, right? Like try other things.
Thank you for that. That's always my answer.
Okay.
Because I'm like, go to counseling, tune-ups. We got to do this for ourselves. Like, take care of yourself. My wife takes a thyroid, and so it's like, this is what you do, right? And so I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And Jeff, for you, my question is really around your community. When you were going through this, and how did your community and your acquaintances interact with you and your child? Were they supportive through that process? And that's a question from one of our viewers.
Yeah, good question. You know, I think it really kind of helps you identify who your true friends are, in a sense, right? This is where you get to learn some things. In general, you know, I had a great community. We had amazing church community that, you know, for all the crazy stuff that would happen, you know, they would never kick you out. They would always come by and say, hey, what's going on? How can we help? How can I understand? And what book can I read? I mean, it was amazing. And that doesn't happen. And, you know, we had great friends in other circles, and you start gravitating towards people that kind of get it. Because in some circles, they just won't. They just have the simplified answers. They know what they know because that's what they've experienced. They're not going to know anything else. So you kind of get to pick and choose. And it's not that anybody has to understand everything, but just a willingness to listen or to kind of take it a step deeper. I think that's how I could kind of determine who were the deeper friends and maybe who wasn't. But in general, we found some support groups and people that get it, and it draws you closer, And as I think about this, if I didn't have something, I'd be worrying about something ridiculous. I would be wasting my time about trying to get my kid in the perfect college and tell everybody, and I'd be you're going to make yourself nervous with something, so you might as well invest in something that's actually worthy of learning something and something that you can invest in. So I think it's kind of forced our hand in doing that and putting us around some good people too.
I'm so grateful that I know you, Jeff, and know you, Liza, Dr. Long, and have seen with great admiration your absolute commitment to your children, all of your children. But you can see it most when the child is most difficult. And just my hat goes to you and Jeff, I know that your journey is not simplified yet. And it's a complicated issue, as you identified at the beginning. It's a complicated issue. All of these combined together in this million-piece puzzle that we're trying to put together, and none of us can do it alone. We need all of the partnerships possible to come together, to support each other, to open their arms to each other and not be competitive, but be embracing and supportive. And we can make a difference.
We want to thank you both, and thank you to all of our viewers tonight. We must all commit to bring fit for ourselves, loved ones, and our communities. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Tragedy Movie, and please review the movie. Tomorrow night is going to be an amazing evening along with tonight, and so thank you to both of our guests. Tomorrow we will be honored to have Senator Deeds and Representative Cutter at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then followed by Dr. Tony Biglin at 9 p.m. Eastern. Until then, take care of one another.